Hi patrons, today I have a special for you, a quick tip on generating dual sculptures. I call them dual sculptures because they use something called the dual graph. In 3D you have meshes, and you can have triangle meshes, like this one here that I drew. And the dual graph is a mathematical term that describes the mesh that is somehow opposite of this one. So how is it constructed? If we create the midpoints of all these triangles, like so, and then connect these midpoints with new edges, we get the dual graph to the triangle graph that we have here. And the nice thing is that this just looks very interesting. It's a mesh structure that is not that obvious and is not seen that often. And we can use this to our advantage to create something that looks visually interesting. And if I do this here on this triangle graph, you see the resulting mesh resembles somehow the Voronoi diagram, or something that looks very similar to a Voronoi diagram. And that is because in mathematics, the dual graph to the Delaunay triangulation is the Voronoi diagram. But enough theory, let's dive into Houdini and build this. I already created this scene for you that you can download, and in here you find this sculpture that I did in 3D Code. It's just a sort of blob with some extrusions, basically, very round, and we need that later on because we want to use the curvature. Nothing more, it's just a file node, and then I transform it down because the stuff that comes in from 3D Code usually is far too large for Houdini. So the first thing that we want to do is to examine the mesh structure. And you see, this is a typical output of Marching Cube's algorithm. And as 3D Code is a voxel sculpture, this is what is to be expected. But we cannot work with that, because the dual graph of this mess here will just be a mess. So how can we transform this surface in something that resembles, at least visually, a Delaunay triangulation? Well, we have this very nice remesh node inside of Houdini. Let's append this remesh node and let's wait a second to generate the output. Remeshing is quite a time-consuming operation, and you see this is already a lot better. But still, the triangles are not looking very even, and some of them are very thin, so this is not optimal. We can enhance the output if we just up the iterations. So let's say, do 5 iterations for us. If we do that, the mesh quality that is created by the remesh node will be a lot better. But at the same time, the triangles will get a lot bigger. So let's decrease the target edge length to something like 0.05 and wait again. And now this is something that looks workable. You see that the triangles pretty much are equally sized, and the inner angles of the triangles are pretty similar, which gives pretty triangles. So let's work with something like this. Although it's a good thing to have equally sized triangles, I want different triangle sizes for aesthetical reasons. So the good thing is that the remesh node has 2 operation modes, fixed length and adaptive. And what adaptive allows you to do is to set an attribute to define the output size of the triangles. And you have to set this attribute before the remesh, of course, on the old mesh. So let's do that. Let's append a VOP, a point VOP. And in here we want to use noise to create an attribute. So it's the old procedure. Put down an anti-alias noise. You know by now that I prefer that one due to execution speed. And then immediately after that, append a fit range, because you have to fit the output of the anti-alias noise, minus 0.5 to 0.5 is 0 to 1, to transform it into a workable range. Now that we have that, we can use our good old ramp parameter to remap the noise, like so, and it will be a float ramp because this is a float parameter. And then a second fit node, fit range, because the values that come out here are in the range of 0 to 1, and we want to set them to the destination values that we want to use to drive the final polygon size. So promote, dest min, and dest max, and let's create a bind export. And by looking into the help card of the remesh node, you can find out that the attribute to drive the polygon size is called target mesh size, like so. To visualize what we are doing, for now, just connect this to CD, and you see that you see nothing, and that is due to the fact, as always, that this ramp defaults to 0. So if we go up here with that, and then move these knobs closer together, we create some sort of noise. Maybe let's dive inside again and promote the frequency parameter of the noise to have more control over the look of it. Maybe something like this. So this is 1 and this is 0. But on the remesh node we use the value of 0.05, so chances are that we want to use something along these lines for the output of our attribute. So let's try 0.1 and 0.5, like so. And go to the remesh node. Again, takes some time to generate the output. But you see nothing has changed, and that is because we did not switch to adaptive yet. As soon as I do that, it's now taking this attribute into account. But at the moment you see not much, and that is because the values are not set correctly. You have to fiddle with the values a little bit to find something that works. So let's go a lot smaller on this one and see if that helps. Oh, and it does. Look at this. Now you have large triangles in the areas where the value is high, and small triangles in the areas where the value is small. Let me get rid of this color visualization, because then we can see the result better. Oh, okay, this is nice. But for my taste, the small triangles are too small and the big ones are too big. So what about changing the values again? Before I do that, I go to this drop-down menu here and go to manual update, because I want to change both values at the same time and I don't want to wait for the remesh node to update. So let's go to 5 here and to 0.2 on this one, and then set this to auto update again. And this already looks a lot more like it. Maybe let's go even smaller with this value. Yeah, that is nice. I like that. Now we have a lot of triangles, and some of them are big and some of them are small. Looks visually more interesting than having all triangles the same size. Before we move on to the next step, call this set target mesh size, such that you can remember what this did if you open the setup in a year or so. So now for the magic. The good thing is that Houdini comes with an operator built-in that creates a dual graph for you, and that is the divide sub. So append a divide sub. And this divide sub does not do much. Normally it's used to divide the geometry up, but down here you find this checkbox that states compute dual, and if you check that, boom, you have this nice Voronoi honeycomb structure. And I think this in its own right is looking very, very nice. But we want to go further. We want to break the surface, but not everywhere. We want to extrude it, but we want to create breaks that form interesting structures. And I decided to use the curvature to drive these breaks. So let's measure some curvature. For this we use a measure sub. Measure. And this sub analyzes the mesh and creates attributes that store information about the mesh. And one of these attributes is curvature. So as soon as I create this, I get on the geometry spreadsheet a new attribute called curvature. And this curvature, it lies in the range between 0 and 1000. And it's a good thing that it is spread like this, because curvature is a tricky beast, and this guarantees enough resolution for the curvature. To see what we created, let's append a visualize quickly, and let's say, please visualize curvature, attribute, ramped attribute, and if you go to infrared, now you see that it computes the curvature. And it does so on the points. And that is not too useful to us, because we want to split the edges apart where the curvature is under a certain threshold. So what we want to do is areas where the curvature is low should stay together when we extrude the thing, and areas with high curvature should break apart. So we need curvature, but we need it on the primitives. Nothing easier than that. Just promote the attribute. With attribute promote, let's call this curvature to prims, like so. So the attribute we want to promote is curvature, and we want to move it from points to primitives with the method average. And if we now append this visualize here and switch it to primitive, we see that we now have faces that are filled with one solid color, because this color is the average of the curvature of the underlying points, or of the points that make up the primitives. A lot better. Now we can say, please Houdini, look at the edges. If the curvature varies more than a certain threshold along this edge, then break the edge. And we can achieve this with a node called vertex split. Vertex split examines a vertex attribute, and if the attribute varies more than this tolerance here, it splits the vertices apart. Very handy. But it cannot work with primitive attributes. It needs vertex attributes. So another attribute promote is needed. Attribute promote. And from here, we promote the information down to the vertices. So from primitive to vertices, and the attribute is curvature. And let's visualize the result of this again by using vertex here. And you see nothing has changed, because if I turn on vertices, you see that every primitive has unique vertices for every point, and it just passes on the value it had before as a primitive attribute to all its vertices. So visually, nothing has changed. Technically, a lot has changed, because the attribute now is on the vertices. Here we have the curvature. And that means that we can now use vertex split. So let's do that. Let's append vertex split here, make it active, and the attribute we want to use to split by is curvature. And you see, if I turn off wireframe, everything got split immediately. That's because the tolerance is very low, and if I go higher with a tolerance, maybe above 1, you see where you see these front breaks, these are the edges that are split by vertex split, where it just unique the points. Very cool. Maybe stay at 2.1 for now. So now, the last step is to extrude this. So append a polyextrude, and just extrude everything outwards along the normal. Just a very tiny little bit, like so. Yeah, 0.02 will do for now. And you see, the vertex split created very intricate patterns here due to this threshold. Now let's append a second polyextrude. And this time I only want to extrude the areas that got already extruded, because I plan to throw everything into a subdivision surface, and to have the caps very sharp, I need another edge loop here. At the moment I have only one extrusion. So I can achieve this by putting out a front group called extrude front, and then limiting the second polyextrude to this group. And you see, now it's just extruding what it already extruded before. And let's just extrude a second time a very, very, very tiny amount, maybe even less than that, like so. You see, now we have just this shaping loop here at the outer front. Very good. And now finally append a subdivide. Oh, and don't forget to name this node curvature to vertices with a T here. And now finally a subdivide. Catmull Clark will do. Give it a depth of 2. get rid of the wire display, and you see now these very coral-like, very organic shapes emerge, because these cracks are defined by the curvature of the underlying surface. And by playing with this threshold parameter, let's say go down to 1.8, you can create more cracks. So it's totally up to you how many cracks you want to create. Let's say we stayed 1.2 here, and this looks nice. Now we have large areas without any cracks, where the curvature doesn't vary very much. And then we have these areas here, where we have nice coral-looking structures. So let's append a final null and call this out sculpture. Sculpture, like so, and set the display and render flags and go up one level. Nice. Now we have that. As we created this object using curvature, it might be a good idea to shade it with curvature or using curvature. So let me quickly create a Redshift setup to render this. To be able to see something, I need first some lights, and I need a Redshift node. So go to the Redshift shelf and click on this Redshift button here, and this creates a Redshift ROP with the render settings. Back to OBJ, and now we need a camera, like so. Camera 1. I usually color this red to indicate that this is a Redshift camera. And now we want to create a RS dome light that is red in my scenes 2. And this will just be something blue-grayish for now, like so. And then we need an RS light. And this RS light should be an area light, like so. So if I go out of this light, I can position it like so maybe, and then rotate it a little bit. Maybe like so. And this light comes with a default intensity of 100, which is far too much for most of the scenes. So switch to camera again. That might work. Great. So now let's do a quick IPR render to see if it works. And yes, this looks nice. Great. So time to create some materials. Switch to the material context and create an RS material builder. Call this sculpture. And in my version of Redshift, which is an old version, I have to set this flag. Chances are, if you're using a newer version of Redshift, this is already set for you. Inside you find the material output, and we want to append our RS material and connect the output color of this material to the surface port. And now let's create a curvature. This curvature here examines the surface curvature and shades it black to white. So append this to the diffuse color, like so. And now for the settings. Maybe let's up the samples to something bigger and then go down by a huge amount with this radius here, because in Houdini this is 1 unit, so these tiny little cracks, and we want to shade these cracks with curvature, are really very small. And before we do an IPR rendering again, let's switch to OBJ again and apply this material. Here under the Render tab, under Matte, we find this sculpture material. So now again IPR. And here you have the curvature, looking very nice and promoting the tiny crackle structures very beautifully. Maybe let's find another angle for the camera. You can say always on top here for this window. Like for example so. And now if we go back to the material, we can create a ramp and just remap this curvature to something more colorful. Important is that you switch the source from UV map to Alt, because then it uses the input color, and then you can do something that suits your taste, like maybe something like this, like so. And even if you move the knobs, you can remap this a little bit. Well, and that is the foundation of rendering this using a curvature-based shader. I hope you like these structures as much as I do, and I hope you learned something. So see you next time, and cheers and goodbye.